Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. We have a program for you today. The title is Evolution True? Well, we have an eminent scholar who is here to discuss this issue with us, and it is my esteemed privilege to welcome Joseph Mastropaolo, PhD. Joseph, what a pleasure it is to have you with us today.
Very happy to meet you, Dr. Baugh.
Well, I've heard of your work for some time, and it's just too intriguing not to include to this global audience and their interest. Now, I want you to know who this man is. First of all, he's associated with some lifelong friends of mine, the people at the Institute for Creation Research. And of course, the founder is Dr. Henry Morris, who's been a friend of mine for long years. The co-founder is Dr. Dwayne Gish, who's been a very personal friend of mine for decades. And now the current president of that leading entity among creation scientists is Dr. John Morris, also a very good friend. And on the faculty is Dr. Joseph Mastropaolo. What do you teach there at Institute for Creation Research?
It's a graduate course, and it's called Advanced Comparative Physiology.
Well, you do advance comparative physiology. In fact, when I read your credentials in a moment, normally, as this audience knows, I give the credentials off the cuff because they are only 8 or 10 by listing, but his credentials are incredible. He's a space scientist. Your specialty is kinesiology, which the audience needs to know has to do with the response of the human physiology to muscles and nerve tissue, etc. Is that right?
That's right.
And you're a specialist in space response of the human physiology. Is that correct?
Yes.
Where did you work?
I worked at McDonnell Douglas in their space systems department, and I also worked in their aircraft division.
All right, and I believe you taught 26 years at the university level.
California State University, Long Beach.
Now, you have your PhD in kinesiology. In fact, rather than read all of this, you were involved in the Gossamer Albatross experiment?
Correct, and the Gossamer Condor.
Yes. The limits of human endurance in propelled mechanism, is that correct?
Yes, they were actually man-powered flight projects which were of a pioneering nature. You have to know something about the mentality of our British colleagues. They thought that we had skipped over man-powered flight. They saw that we had gliders, and then we went immediately with the Wright brothers to powered airplanes with mechanical engines.
But Da Vinci ran some experiments, at least on paper, did he not?
Yes, he did, but his were not successful. And so what the British did was they offered a prize, 2 prizes as a matter of fact. The first one, fly a figure 8 with a man-powered airplane, no assistance with any kind of mechanical device, just by human power. We won that prize.
And you were able to do that?
I was able to, as a matter of fact, as part of my reward, was to fly that airplane. I flew it, and that was a thrill of a lifetime.
And you were the lead research scientist?
I was the physiologist that was helping the pilot.
Oh, this is marvelous.
He was not able, with his racing training, to complete the prize. So I gave him this experimental method, and as he tried it more and more, he got closer and closer to winning the prize, and he finally won it. Then the British offered a second prize. They said, what we really paid attention to in Britain was when Blériot, a Frenchman, flew across the English Channel. Now we're going to offer the second prize for anyone that will fly from England to France, and it will be double the worth of the first prize. And that was a much greater challenge. We won that one as well.
And did you fly that one?
I flew it after we had won the prize, yes.
This is absolutely incredible. We read about these things and we see them in the newsreels, but here is the man actually involved, the research scientist making it possible. Joseph, it is a pleasure to have you on the program today. You know quite a bit about human physiology, and as a biologist, you know a lot about living systems. Have you ever been taught the theory of evolution?
I was an evolutionist for most of my life. And Dr. Baugh, I want to confidentially tell you that I consider that the greatest betrayal of my entire educational career.
Incredible.
And that was because I was not allowed to think about any other possibilities. I lost my faith as a result of that.
Yes.
I was told that you either be a scientist, which I always wanted to be, or you will be biblically oriented. You can't really be both. And I was told that the Bible was just stories. Now what you want to do is learn science. And they told me that the only thing in science was evolution. And when I found out that that was false, I completely felt betrayed.
Yes.
It was a huge betrayal. I had wasted so many years doubting my faith.
Now you're saying, and this audience needs to get this, you're saying that as a major scientific researcher, you had embraced the concept, the theory of evolution. You had embraced it as a life system to explain how we got here. But you found in your advanced research, biological research, that evolution is not true and cannot be true. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I sort of got into it in an unusual way. It was that I saw that one of my prize students became extremely emotional when someone challenged her on the evidence for evolution. And I thought, what could there be about the theory that would cause her such an emotional upset? And so I looked into it. And what I found was there was good reason. She apparently was adhering to evolution as someone else might adhere to a religion.
Yes, that is a major statement. So you're telling me, and you're telling this audience, that as a major scientific researcher, you espoused evolution, but you do not now espouse evolution. You believe creation, not only creation, biblical creation, scientific creation. Is that correct?
Dr. Baugh, I have written this little booklet, and it's called Biology for the 21st Century, and the Life Science Prize tested devolution, evolution, and genesis. And the conclusion of all of that research is that evolution is not science. It may have been portrayed that way recently on PBS, but it is not science. It actually is anti-science.
Beautiful statement. Now, if anyone calls, we're not selling books here, but if anyone wants to get a copy of your book, that booklet, and I've read that booklet, they need that booklet. And a little later, we're going to close with this life science challenge that you've made to some of the world's leading evolutionary scholars. So can we make arrangements if people just call the museum, we'll get them in touch with you to get a copy of that book?
Definitely.
You know, recently, I take various periodicals, and Scientific American recently had an article, March 2005, had an article where Dr. Michael Shermer stated, well, evolution is true, even though there is no direct evidence for it. It's a long panorama. It's a certain sequence. Together, these points of sequence reveal a majestic story of process over time that we call evolution. That is a bunch of trash, isn't it?
I would like to give you a little more information about Dr. Shermer. We challenged him to come before a judge with myself.
This is incredible. To come before a judge.
Yes. It was going to be a trial in which the judge would accept only scientific information.
Yes.
And on the basis of that evidence would decide whether evolution would give him a prize of $10,000 or whether he would lose his entry fee of $10,000 to me if I proved that evolution was a religion and not a science.
Did he show up?
He would not respond. And that told me, now the reason that I did this was because my research said that evolution is a sham.
Yes, yes.
Now, in order to be sure, absolutely sure, you might say the acid test is to challenge the leading evolutionists on the planet. If they have any evidence that they've been hiding, $10,000 should bring it forth.
Would you say that again? This is too good to miss. Would you repeat that again? You have challenged. You were an evolutionist as a scientific researcher because you had blinders and you accepted only that paradigm, but you found out that evolution is a fraud and a sham. Now, by evolution, we're not talking about microevolution, variation within genetic boundaries. We all vary, but we're talking about, as I read in your book, the progression of new, additional beneficial information added so that one kind progresses to another kind. That's the standard theory of evolution. Variation within genetic boundary is accepted. But for this macroevolutionary progression from amoeba to man, you have challenged the world's leading evolutionary scholars. How many of them?
45.
To appear before a judge in an advanced appellate court, a knowledgeable judge, not a fellow at the county seat.
Superior Court judge.
Excellent. So you've challenged all of these, the leading evolutionary thinkers of our generation. How many have responded?
Well, some have responded. Some actually said, well, I actually took some advantage of one of these individuals, Kenneth Miller of Brown University, who's put out a biology book. And I said, Dr. Miller, why do you still have in your biology book these frauds and forgeries from over 100 years ago that were exposed over 100 years ago? And he said, which ones? So I said, that tells me that you're very confident of your evidence. Why don't you contend and double your money? We'll have this contest in court. You bring your 10,000, I'll bring mine, and we'll have the judge decide
and
on
winner
the basis.
Take all.
The winner takes both checks. And he said, no. It was a very simple reply. N-O.
In other
No.
words, we have a generation that has had propaganda produced as if evolution were true, but it's an absolute fraud. And when a person knowledgeable in these areas challenges the individuals, they quietly back down or say nothing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Oh, this is marvelous. Now, let's not keep the audience out of what we're talking about. Let's lead the audience through this information. Dr. Mastropaolo, oh, by the way, I understand that your name might be associated with a very famous individual in Italy in the past. Is that correct?
That's correct. The family story is that Michelangelo had a teacher whose name was Paul, and therefore, in Italian, would be known as Mastro, which means teacher, Paolo, which is Paul. And so that's our family name. We don't know whether we were related to that teacher Paul or not, but that's our family name. I think I shared with you that I consider it a privilege to have a name like Teacher Paul.
Absolutely.
Going back to biblical times, I think that's quite a compliment for our family.
Well, you're living up to that designation, and now millions of people are watching this program at this moment. Would you take us through this information so that everyone in the audience can get in on these truths that evolution is fraudulent?
Here's the title of the booklet. It's called Biology for the 21st Century and the Life Science Prize, which we were just talking about, tested devolution, evolution, and genesis. I show Adam and Eve larger than the current human beings.
As they should be.
Because they were probably superior to us physiologically and in other ways. And I show them joined with a representation of DNA. In other words, we've had our DNA passed down to us. And then I show below that ape people, which is the evolutionist what can we say, their contradiction of the Bible. And so the book is really saying, well, here's evolution, here is Genesis, and if we look at the whole universe, what we find is devolution. And so we have embodied in the cover then most of the contents of the booklet.
Let's point out something you just said. In the entire universe, we have the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, which is devolution, decay, destruction. Everything is running down. So the audience should know that. Now, please continue.
Here we have world population history, and it's from the U.S. Census Bureau. So I want to emphasize that this is science. And so what we have is the present world population, about 6 billion people. And what the Census Bureau shows is that it continually was less as we go back in time until we come to an original couple.
That recently. That's amazing.
Just a few thousand years ago.
And this is following the curve.
Correct.
The standard curve. Excellent. Please keep going.
I've shown here what we know from medical research, current medical research, starting from the year 1966. New genetic disorders have been cataloged by the medical community from published, peer-reviewed medical journal articles.
Now, class, here is a world-class scholar, eminent in his field, stating to us, let's make sure I'm getting it right, that since 1966, we've had a crescendo, a mushroom of new genetic disorders, not only that were not found before, but that really didn't exist before. So we are imploding. We're losing it from within.
What this graph shows is what you have just said, and that is that we are devolving.
Yes.
The whole universe is running down, and that includes us.
We're losing our viability.
Exactly. And therefore, this disproves evolution as well as proving devolution.
Yes.
And therefore, it is giving us information that we need, because we are next going to ask, what is the controversy about? Because if we had this original couple, the question is, what were they like? Were they like us, represented there, there, and there? Or were they represented like that? Did they look like ape people? Which one did they look like? Well, I looked into these ape people, and what I found was it was a complete forgery. It was a complete fiction. The so-called scientist hired an artist and said, make them that way. And you might notice, or perhaps not be able to see, but her big toe looks almost like the big toe of a monkey. So he was trying to say these were transitional people.
And they're really just figments of the imagination of the evolutionists.
It was a complete fiction. It wasn't even based on one bone or one fraction of a bone.
But given the name Pithecanthropus alalis.
That is what I would like to emphasize. I'm glad that you brought that up, because what this is a scientific name which means a speechless ape man.
That is supposed to be derived from an actual specimen, a scientific bit of data that you can examine and critique.
Exactly. And so what I would like to emphasize is that this is anti-biology.
Yes.
Because biology is based upon the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Supposedly.
And if you purposely deceive people, then what you're engaging in is anti-biology, because that will actually work against science and push us back in time.
Yes.
And that's what this man actually did. And that's why I call it anti-biology exhibit number 1.
So there never has been a Pithecanthropus alalis.
Never has been. It was a figment of his imagination.
But given a technical, scientific, Latinized name as if it existed, and foster that in propaganda on the public and in the biology texts.
And that is what I call pollution. It's a scholar polluting the literature with a purposeful fraud that's embellished with a scientific name.
You are armed with the truth. I like those odds.
Now, this is what I got from our colleagues who are lawyers. This comes from Black's Law Dictionary. It says, falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus. And what that means is false in one thing, false in everything.
Yes.
And if the testimony is willfully false, as that was, with the intention to deceive, which that was, jury may disregard all the witness's testimony. That comes from Black's Law Dictionary, and therefore all ape men are forgeries.
Legally, that's true.
In a court of law, that's what it would be found to be.
No wonder the world's eminent scholars have refused to go before a judge. You are armed with the truth. Okay, time, you know, when you're having fun, time flies. Let's get some more of this data.
Well, I want to go to this one because it was the Piltdown forgery of 1912 to 1952, and you notice that it was given the same
Eoanthropus dawsoni,
which meant dawn man discovered by Dawson.
Yes.
And this is a sculpture of it, and what it actually was a fragment of a human skull with an orangutan jawbone, both dyed brown with iron and chromate acid dyes, so that they would look like they came from the same organism.
And the teeth filed down?
The teeth were filed down. The articulations were broken off so that you couldn't test to see if they would fit in the skull. It was a purposeful fraud.
Now say that again. This audience needs... Oh, we need you here for an entire series. This fraud, known as the Piltdown Man, I understand that hundreds of technical articles were written at the university level, submitted and accepted on this creature, but they actually broke... Now, I knew the other details until previously, but actually Dawson broke off the joints so you couldn't tell if they joined because they did not join.
Correct.
Major fraud.
Major fraud, very purposeful. The intent obviously was to deceive, and yet it was kept in the British Museum of Natural History for 40 years, away from the eyes of any doubters. Only the people that believed in evolution were allowed to see it, and the only thing that was allowed out of the museum were plaster casts, and you couldn't tell from the casts whether those teeth had been filed down or not.
How did they learn, or have they learned the truth? This audience needs to know.
The reason that it was revealed was that the evolutionists found that they were stymied because they could not go forward with other ape men because of what this ape man was supposed to be like. The sequence just didn't work for them. And so this became a problem. They eliminated the problem by exposing it as the fraud that it always was.
And they had known for a period of time that it was a fraud, but they held 40 years, but they held on to it because it aided in their system of evolutionary thought.
Correct.
Let's get another major point across, and then the program is over. You're going to have to come back next week because we have so much information. Are you willing to do that?
I am willing to do that.
Absolutely. Let's get another major point and close it for the moment.
This one was Nebraska man forgery, Hesperopithecus Harold Cookie Eye. Now, this is the picture that was made from an artist that was hired to do this. It was on the basis of one tooth.
Yes.
That tooth was not a human tooth. It was not a chimpanzee tooth. It wasn't even any kind of tooth that you would say was related at all to this. It was actually an extinct pig's tooth.
Incredible. Do you know that we actually have at the museum, in safety deposit, when we get the museum completed, we will display it with security. We have one of the teeth of Hesperopithecus Harold Cookie Eye. not the original tooth, but one of the teeth. When he went back in 1925 to the same creek bed, gravel bed, and found the rest of the specimen that turned out to be a pig, we have one of the teeth. It looks somewhat like an ape's tooth, like a human molar, but turns out to be a pig's tooth. In closing, let me point this out. Not only did the evolutionist represent the tooth, but the complete man, his posture, his tool, his wife, they represented a fence and domestication of animals, an entire culture from a single tooth that turned out to be a pig's tooth. These final moments have come too fast. Do you understand what you've learned today? We have a world-class scholar, recognized as such, programmed, disciplined in the theory of evolution, believed it, embraced it, taught it. But as he went further in his studies, he found that evolution was not true, but instead the scientific pyramid of truth rests solidly on the Genesis account of creation. Now, it's not enough just to know that. We need to embrace it. We need to know the Creator. He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to die for us. Would you like to know Him? Would you just simply bow your head and pray this simple prayer? Pray it with me. Dear God, I'm a sinner. I know You created me, and I want to have peace and relationship with You. Right now, Lord Jesus, I open my heart to You. Come into my heart and live forever, and I'll serve You with all my heart. Amen. Today has been a transforming experience. Welcome to the truth. Information like you've received today is available at the Creation Evidence Museum in printed form, in videos. We even have a coloring book for the kids. Just call or write us at Creation Evidence Museum, P.O. Box 309, Glen Rose, Texas 76043, area code 254-897-3200, or check us out on the web, creationevidence.org.